Keller.
Phew, thank you. Sorry, Katie. Madam Deputy Speaker, I thank you for the opportunity to speak on this bill. What I would say to the member for Kingsford Smith is I appreciate his newfound, and I shall not detain the House for many minutes on this, because it is clearly a very simple issue of allowing us to give greater flexibility to the way that we manage our listed companies and the way that shareholders can interact with their boards of directors. The fact that the Labor Party is opposed to this is no surprise to me, Deputy Chair, because as the member for Kingsford Smith, mate, well, we'll wait and see when the vote comes. We'll wait and see. Is because, of course, they want to ignore governance, because we've seen at Australian Super just today that the chair of ASIC has made the point that what has been going on at Australian Super is, plain and simple, a breach of directors' duties. A breach of directors' duties. So we understand why the Labor Party is so keen to ensure that directors, especially those from industry super, are not subjected to the law, to review, to any of the things that matter when it comes to the governance of a corporation. So it is of great interest.
The member for McKellar will resume his seat. The member for Whitlam on a point of order.
Always delighted to hear the member for McKellar, but relevance is the point of order. This is a bill about virtual AGMs, not
Whitlam,
about superannuation, not about directors of superannuation
has made his
trusts.
point. The member for Whitlam will resume his seat. The member for McKellar has the call, and I would ask the member for McKellar to return to the substance of the legislation.
And I appreciate that, Madam Deputy Chair, and I shall do that. At this point, I will now begin an educational session for those opposite on how companies operate. I'm so glad that they get to vote on bills that define how our companies operate. So what happens is there are these things called superannuation funds, and they invest in listed companies. And what the chair of the Australian Securities and Investment Commission, who knows a little bit about corporation law and who knows a little bit about corporate governance, was saying today was that those superannuation funds have been misusing their position and been involved in insider trading. And in doing so, they have been in breach of their general duties as a director in terms of the way that they have been conducting themselves. And so when we get to virtual AGMs, which is what this bill is about, of course it would suit those opposite to ensure that the investors are elected by big super, who are the big donors of the Labor Party, are not subjected to the sort of rigorous examination that the owners of a company should normally have. So what we have here is a bill that brings our corporate governance and the way that our annual general meetings operate into the 21st century, and we have those opposite moving their usual amendments and other things so that they vote for us.org.au can have a little go and suggest and spread their fake news and misinformation, which is what they love doing, because that's how it operates on that side. I mean, if they really thought that the Australian people agreed with them, then they'd tell the Australian people what they really think. But actually, it's no. Well, this is going to be interesting. So where was I? Relevance, that's right. Thank you. Thank you, those officer. Thank you. So where we're at now, apparently, as I speak for the next 10 minutes and 37 seconds, is the following. Yes, the member for Whitlam, he can't handle the heat in the kitchen, so he has to leave the chamber. That's right, the member for Whitlam, I dare you to stay. I dare you to listen to the truth, which is that the big super is at this moment undermining the very importance of what it is for our listed companies to be in corporate governance. So I welcome the member for Whitlam back to the dispatch box. No, he's just lurking. What we have here is a piece of legislation that will ensure that we can do what is required to make it possible for us to bring corporate governance and annual general meetings into the 21st century. Why is this important, Madam Deputy Speaker? Well, it's important for a number of reasons. The first is that Australians during this pandemic got very used to conducting business online. They got very used to how important it is and how easy it is to do. Secondly, it actually broadens the number of people who can attend these meetings. That means that directors and boards will be subjected to more oversight because, simply put, there will be more investors, more owners of those companies at these meetings. And when they're at these meetings, two things will happen. The first is they will be given the opportunity to ask questions of directors, of management, to ensure that their investments are being undertaken both in the interest of shareholders and the interest of customers. I mean, I just wonder how many of these very large corporates would be such advocates and funders of all the woke causes they are if indeed investors, their owners, were able to ask them questions like how it benefited employees, how it benefited customers, and how it benefited them, the owners of the corporations. As we know, most of this funding goes on because it benefits management, because then they get invited to all the swanky dinner parties where they can all tell each other what a great job they're doing and you know, how they're saving the world as they fly from one end of the world to the other in a private jet, no doubt using shareholder funds to achieve this, and lecture other people about the importance of how corporates need to be involved in all these very important and earnest public policy issues. So I understand why there are some directors, I understand why there are some proxy advisors so opposed to this idea, because if they were in favour of this idea of actually not just blindly following what the proxy advisor tells management and tells the board to do, and that owners actually had a say, and that owners could attend these meetings and ask the difficult questions on behalf of customers and employees. Because I don't mean to shock the intolerant and regressive left by making this point when they say, oh, people before profit. But without people, there is no such thing as a profit. The whole point of profit is that someone somewhere was voluntarily willing to hand over their money for a good or service that you are willing to provide to them voluntarily and pay money for that. That is why the market works so much better than government, because we take money from people without asking them. Often, if they had a choice, they would never give it to us, and then provide them with services that in some cases they don't want, in most cases they don't need, and in many, many cases do more harm than good. This would, if government were a company where people had a choice about whether they wanted to buy the service or good that we were providing, well, I can tell you now, I'm not sure that we would survive one reporting season. So it is important. That is why market economies work so much more than centralised government economies. And I mean, at the moment, I'm involved in a great inquiry to determine why housing in Australia is so unaffordable. I mean, we have this situation where we have more land than basically any other nation in the world in terms of, per person, per capita land mass. Our densities are the lowest in the world outside the penguin population on the South Pole. We have the highest average weekly earnings in the world, though those opposite once again seek to fake information, misinformation, to say that we don't. And yet we have the most unaffordable housing in the world. And why is that the case? Well, because we have a centralised planning system in the provision of housing. And so we have these AGM reforms, which are actually about bringing more people in to the discussion about how companies are operated. And those opposite seek to pretend somehow that this is this is a bad idea. Well, it's not. The more people who have access to democracy, the better democracy is. I would also point out to those opposite that in this democratic system that is shareholder capitalism, you also have to identify that you own some shares. So you see, voter IDs work very well in all sorts of different elections, Madam Deputy Speaker. But the point that I would primarily make in all of this, the point that I would strongly make in all of this, is that if you can't get access to the meeting, it doesn't work. So we see here that Big Super is opposed to this. We see that proxy advisors are opposed to this. We see all these sorts of things going on ad nauseum, and why people are opposed to them, because they're opposed to ordinary, average Australians, working men and women of this country, being able to have a say on how companies that they're invested in both operate and behave. Those opposite would prefer that the working men and women of Australia give all their money to Big Super, to industry super, and then industry super will tell these companies how to operate. And industry super will tell this. And we've already seen how this has started to happen. I mean, we've seen industry super in breach of their legal obligations. And once again, I encourage APRA to do their job and actually uphold the law when it comes to industry super, forcing companies to enter into enterprise agreements, even though that is not in the interests of employees, is not in the interests of shareholders, and is not in the interests of customers. I understand why those opposite. Now, the more I think about it, Deputy Chair, the more I understand why those opposite are so opposed to shareholders having a say in the organisations that they have ownership in, because they would prefer the collective in industry super to have a say. So of course they want to keep people offline. They would probably prefer that all these AGMs occur in boardrooms in Collins Street, where industry super presides. That's where they want them all, where the directors of those companies, according to the chair of the Australian Securities and Investment Commission, have been gathering insider information and then trading on that information. It's extraordinary that those opposite come in here and lecture this side about the Hayne Royal Commission, but fail to point out all of the investigations, one by one, like bowling pins, they are falling over on industry super and all the misappropriate and inappropriate governance in those areas. And of course, the more democracy we have, the more transparency we have, which you would have...
Order. The member for McKellar will resume his seat. The member for Whitlam.
Yeah, a question to the member speaking, Deputy Speaker.
Does the member for McKellar accept a question?
I was going to ask you if you're aware that...
Member for Whitlam will resume his seat. The member for McKellar has the call.
No.
The member for McKellar has the call. Member for Whitlam will resume his seat. And the member for McKellar has the call.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. Thank you, Deputy Chair. I knew he couldn't stay away. I knew he'd go back to his office. He'd hear this great speech. He'd want to know more. He'd want to be a part of it. He couldn't help himself. Deputy Chair, the member for Whitlam, he's nothing if he's not a sucker for a good speech. He's nothing if not a sucker for a good speech, and that's why he attends so many of my speeches. Once or twice he has called quorum on me. I don't want to give him any ideas, but he has done that once or twice. It wasn't. I don't think it was fair or nice of him to do that. And
the member for McKellar should resume to the substance of the legislation.
Oh well, of course. Where were we? Industry super and their lack of governance, and how having AGMs, virtual AGMs, will bring more shareholders into those AGMs where they can see how their money is not being managed to their benefit, how they can see how Big Super, who are the big donors of the Labor Party, how they are taking their money and using it to run their own political organisations through the boardrooms of Australia without reference to their legal obligations under the financial tests and the sole purpose tests. And I call on APRA to do their job, because they haven't been doing their job, Deputy Speaker. They haven't been, and that's why this legislation is so necessary. So more Australians can get in there and see
Order.
what
The
they
member
haven't
for
been doing.
McKellar's time has expired. The